This our regular committee.
So let's start to resume, everybody's been very eager over the last few people.
Oh my God.
Plus, here's another
How
class.
old?
We have two parents children.
Is he adorable? Oh my goodness.
Our things that we're the clip is.
I bet. And I'm going
Yeah,
leaving out my other job. So it's not that I don't like what you're saying.
All right, friends, we're going to get started, and I would like to thank both Rich for being our moderator, Bill for being here for what I know is going to be a wonderful presentation. But let's start with prayer before we get started. Let's pray, friends. Gracious God, we're so grateful for each other, for the people who make a difference in our community and world. Most of all, we give thanks for Bill and the words that he is going to share to us in just a moment. Be with us, and may we feel your spirit in this space today. In your name we pray. Amen.
Well, I want to welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out this Memorial Day Sunday morning. I parked my car over by the green, and as I walked over this morning, I looked first at our county Civil War monument, which we pass so often, and we probably just pass it by most days and don't really think too much about it, but framed against a beautiful cloudless late May blue sky. It was a very poignant image, and I continued down this driveway to come in the back door, and there's our church graveyard with the occasional small American flag marking the graves of people who served in the military for our country. And it's just one of those holidays that I think it's very easy for us to get caught up in barbecues, parades. Steve and I are lacrosse fans. We're both going to be watching the national championship on Memorial Day Monday. Ball games, you name it. It's one of the heaviest travel weekends of the year. I was down in Washington, D.C. on Friday trying to catch an Amtrak train back up here, and all went okay, but the place was mobbed. And somehow, we take holidays and, we make the most of them. It's a day off for a lot of people that are still working. That's a good thing. We all need some rest. It's a great thing to gather with family. You're going to probably be with your son in Denville. Pat and Bill will be with them on Monday. And yet, by the same token, there's a purpose to the holiday. And that's what we want to get at today as Christians. So today we'll be holding a Memorial Day conversation. And that conversation will be held with the United States Marine Corps and Presbyterian Church of Morristown's Bill Cunningham. And delighted to see Bill here today, and we're also delighted to see Bill's wife, Pat. An awful lot of people in this room have known Bill and Pat for a long, long time. Some of us have only just met them or will meet them before we go today. But it's awful special to have you here, Bill, today, and you too, Pat, and we thank you very much for that. What we're going to do is we will begin with just a little bit of Korean War 101. Most of us have some familiarity with that event. Some of us a lot of familiarity with that event. But I think it'll help us all to just have a little bit of context first, and I'll kind of drop back into high school history teacher mode for just a few minutes and try to handle that. And after that, Bill and I will have a conversation for a few minutes, and we hope that there'll be plenty of time for you to have questions for Bill, and then we'll close things off that way. So I'll tell you what, maybe the best thing we can do so that we can get our focus quickly is just for me to give a brief bio of Bill Cunningham. Bill is a Hoosier, born a Hoosier, correct? No.
Born in Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit.
But a month later, moved back to Indiana.
All right. So does that make you an official Hoosier?
Well, I claim to be.
I think you should. I think you should. Bill was in the United States Marine Corps for 3 years. 13 months of those 3 years were spent in Korea during the Korean conflict. Once it was over, Bill went to and took a diploma from Indiana University. Are you a basketball fan?
I'm from Indiana.
You must be.
That's nothing else to me.
Bill is still currently a vice president with Newmark Associates, which is a major real estate firm here in New Jersey. He specializes in industrial and office leasing and sales and land sales. Bill is still active, as we say. He has worked in the past for Goodyear Tire and Rubber. He was a manager of a major Midwestern department store. He also worked for a number of years in his family's retail business. Bill is a longtime and devoted Rotarian. Still active.
Still active.
He and Pat are longtime members of PCM. Do you know how long you've been
Here?
there? Yeah. Roughly.
I don't know. You know, Pat?
Well,
We're gonna send a lifeline here. Have you been here
How
for
long have
30
you
or
been
40
members?
years? Yeah.
Oh, gosh, I don't remember.
Yeah. 30 or
Long
40
time.
years.
Yeah. We've been Presbyterians forever, but we belonged in Parsippany. And we moved
I belonged to that church for a while.
up in the hill.
Yeah.
And we moved to Morris Plains.
Mhm.
And then we moved out to Mendham, so we belonged there. And then we joined here. Well, we moved to the Poconos for a while
Really?
and lived up there. And when we moved back, we were living in Fox Hills out in Rockaway. We were looking around for a church and decided the trip here is better than not belonging here.
Yeah.
So that's when we joined.
So you've been longtime members. Pat was once a Stephen minister.
I'm sorry?
You were once a Stephen minister.
Yes.
And a deacon.
And Bill has
And a
been elder.
deacon.
Yeah. They have 3 children, 6 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. And Bill loves and has played his share of jazz. He's a jazz drummer. He's a golfer. And he's an avid reader and has special interest in reading historical fiction with an emphasis on military historical fiction, the American Revolution, the Civil War, probably World War II,
Yeah.
and certainly the Korean War.
Yeah.
That's our guest today. I think what I'd like to do then is to just move into this contextual phase so that you can understand where we are. We're going to go back to 1950, and that's a long way back. So let's see if we can establish some context here. This map, excuse me, I'm going to get up and I'm trying not to block you here, Audrey. This map will show you 4 phases of the Korean War, and they progress this to that. On June 25th, 1950, the North Korean Army in North Korea was created at the end of World War II. The Korean Peninsula, long under Japanese occupation, was liberated, and North and South Korea were 2 countries formed along this parallel, the 38th parallel. Think of it as the kind of thing that happened in Vietnam, North and South, or what happened in Germany, East and West. It was a post-war settlement between the Soviets and especially the Americans, but also the British and to some degree the French. North Korea was communist. South Korea, maybe not democratic as we would know it, but certainly anti-communist. North Korea was in the Soviet sphere of influence, South Korea in the American sphere of influence. And on June 25th, 1950, the North Koreans invaded the South. And it was a stunning sort of a thing. No one saw it coming. It was cleared by Stalin of the Soviet Union to go ahead and do. And the North Korean forces rapidly covered ground and overran just about the entire country of South Korea. Meanwhile, there are American troops under the command of Douglas MacArthur in Japan. they're quickly sent to try to stop this from happening. A UN resolution was quickly adopted. The Soviets didn't block it in the Security Council because they were boycotting the Security Council at that time. Had they been around, I don't think that UN resolution would have passed. But in effect, what that UN resolution did was to say, this is an illegal act, and the United Nations is going to try to block it. And so, troops got sent in, American troops in the vanguard, the 24th Infantry Division was sent in. They had been on occupation duty and they were not ready for this kind of an activity. They were under strength. Many of them were kind of out of battle shape, but they found themselves having to fight. The Allied forces got pushed back, and you can see all the way down here to this little light green area called Pusan. Pusan was a port city on the Sea of Japan, and they held out as long as they could, trying to buy time while reinforcements were sent. It was a desperate situation in the summer of 1950. They almost got pushed right into the ocean. But they held on and they held out. And then in September, MacArthur changes the game entirely. Douglas MacArthur, great military hero of World War II, a controversial figure in many ways, pulls off what is probably the greatest coup of his military career. He loads troops onto ships and in an amphibious operation heads up the Yellow Sea and lands at a port called Incheon, not far from the South Korean capital of Seoul, which had been overrun by the North Koreans, as had the whole country. It's a stunning operation. It's a total success. And the North Korean troops, and once again here the yellow represents the North Koreans, the green represents the Allies. The North Korean troops are forced to withdraw from Pusan, and in a headlong retreat, they head for the 38th parallel, then cross it because they're being pursued by MacArthur's army. It's a great, great victory for him, and he's pretty sure he's ended the war. Now, an important geographic thing for us to be aware of is this river, which you see running along the north end of North Korea. That's the Yalu River, and it's the river that divides China and North Korea. 1949, China had fallen to Mao and to the communists, so it's a communist nation at that point, and an ally of North Korea in the sense that they share a communist background. After taking Seoul, MacArthur decides that the thing to do is to push further into North Korea and, if possible, unify the whole Korean peninsula as a non-communist place, essentially to erase North Korea. And so he sends troops in a headlong attack up the North Korean peninsula. He's talking about them going all the way to the Yalu, and you can see that pretty much happens. By the way, Audrey, that's okay, I think we're okay. As he gets closer to the Yalu, Mao Zedong and the Chinese leadership become ever more concerned that they're going to have a long-term problem on their hands with the Americans sitting just across the river from them. They're even a little concerned that they might cross that river. And it's then that the Chinese make a pivotal decision, and that is they're going to intervene in this war. MacArthur, who's a little bit isolated, he never spends one night in Korea during this whole war, is certain that the Chinese would never enter. Well, he's wrong. They do. And this is kind of where our story comes in. At some point, these forces heading north, if you see this light blue right-handed thing, Bill's part of this. It's decided that MacArthur will send a two-pronged strike up into North Korea. One, mostly Army troops. One, the 10th Corps, of which the 1st Marine Division is an organization. They head up the east coast of North Korea, and they will eventually wind up at a place called Chosin Reservoir. Okay, Audrey, I think this is MacArthur at the time of the Incheon landings, and this is the commander of the 10th Corps, a guy named Ned Almond, an Army general, who's going to be part of this whole story too, although we won't spend much time on him. Okay, Audrey, this is Chosin Reservoir. It's that's a photo from that time. look hard at the terrain around that kind of beautiful lake. The Marines are sent to garrison the west side of Chosin Reservoir, and a small contingent of Army troops are sent to the east side. As they march north, they think they detect a Chinese presence, but the Chinese are not showing their hand very much. It's not until they get pretty well dug in the mountains around Chosin Reservoir that it becomes apparent that the Chinese are very much there. This is all happening round about November and December of 1950. Did you get Thanksgiving dinner when you were there? Do you remember?
Yeah, they made a big deal about that.
Made a big deal about delivering things. Now, there's no fighting yet. I don't think, well, maybe there was by that time. But the U.S. Marines, part of that 1st Marine Division, dug in all over this area. Find themselves spending their Thanksgiving, someplace in the presence of the enemy. Bill will talk about this, I imagine, but it's November and then December of 1950 in North Korea. Temperatures begin to drop. They begin to drop very quickly. They get down to as low as 36 degrees below zero, and that's up in the highlands. That's with a lot of wind. And what perhaps nobody understands is that 20,000 Marines have walked into a trap. That trap is the 9th Chinese Army Group. There are at least 100,000 Chinese soldiers that are in these mountains all around this reservoir. And we've got 20,000 Marines and about 10,000 Army soldiers over here confronting 100 to 120,000 Chinese soldiers. And game on, the battle's on. To a great degree, the Chinese, realizing that they don't have enough air power to overwhelm the Marines, decide that what they'll do is they'll do their fighting at night. And they'll use human wave tactics, and before they attack, in an interesting sort of a thing, they'll actually announce that they're coming. They blow bugles, they crash cymbals, and before long, it's a kind of a human wave attack on dug-in Marines. Okay, could you just? This is what their commander, General Song Shi-un of the 9th Army Group, says to them just before the attacks begin. Soon we will meet the American Marines in battle, and we will destroy them. When they are defeated, the enemy army will collapse, and our country will be free from the threat of aggression. I want you to kill the Marines as you would a snake in your own home. That's what the men of the 1st Marine Division face in pretty unforgiving conditions. Okay, Audrey. In a minute, we're just going to look at some images. There really won't be much comment in them. But these are photos taken during this campaign. The Marines will fight with great distinction and in a way that has gone down in Marine history and American history. But ultimately, their gifted commander, a guy named General Oliver Smith, will realize that this is not going to go the way that it should. So after weeks of hard fighting, he decides we've got to get this force back out of here. 100,000 to 20,000 is just not odds that are going to work for us. And so they begin a fighting retreat back down to the coast where they would be evacuated.
It was not a retreat.
I'm sorry.
We attacked in a different direction.
Which is what? Thanks for the correction. Oliver Smith said, retreat hell, right? He said, we're just advancing in a different direction. That's a Marine talking.
There you go.
I want to just show some images. Now, some of these images are actually going to show Marines, in what looks like combat. Understand that there really weren't a lot of photographers around in the initial phase of this thing. Smith had been smart enough to build an airfield at the south end of the reservoir. That enabled them eventually to evacuate the wounded. It also meant that the press, which was beginning to get very interested in this story, as was the whole country, was able to get people in. And so a lot of the images that we're going to look at are not from that fighting. Of course, an awful lot of the fighting is nighttime fighting, so you couldn't do much with images there. Many of these images are going to be taken by photographers who came in once that airfield was completed and once the what was the phrase we used, just Bill? I don't want to use that R word again, you know.
Fighting in a different direction.
Once the advance in a different direction begins, most of these images are going to be from that. So you and I don't really get a chance to look at Marines in combat. That would have been all but impossible. So many of these are from that advance to the coast. So as you look at them, just use what I've given you to imagine what it must have been like. And in a moment, we're going to find out from a definitive source what this was all like. But Audrey, we could just kind of go at a nice kind of a slow basis and let people examine these images a little bit before we bring in Bill. Frostbite was a major issue.
It was. But the problem was we had rubber boots, so when you walked, your feet would sweat, and then when you stopped, they would freeze. So a lot of frostbite. Guys lost their feet.
I was going to say, in bad cases, right? That's going to involve amputation. When we think of Marines fighting, many of us think of World War II in the Pacific or Vietnam. You know, men that tended to fight in tropical kind of climates. This is not that. Do you remember anything about the kind of clothing that they gave you aside from the boots?
Yeah, we had, first we wore like a t-shirt, and on top of that was a pull-on sweater type thing, and on top of that we had our jackets, and then we had the parkas. So we had 2 or 3 layers, and that's what they taught us, to put it on in layers, because the air in between captures the heat.
The retreat ran from here down to here, the port of Hong Kong, and eventually many of the Marines that went in were able to be extracted. I'm almost done with my segment. The part that we all came to hear, it's just about to start. In the Chosin campaign, 30,000 Chinese were killed. That's out of 100,000 soldiers, so that's a very high rate of death, but then again, using human wave tactics, you would expect that. About 12,500 were wounded. 750 Marine Corps dead, 3,200 wounded or missing. Once this plays itself out, there's a general, Audrey, can we go back to those maps for a second? Thanks. You can see here that what happens is the war turns again after this great Allied push north. That's reversed, and the Allies wind up dropping back. The North Koreans and the Chinese are on the attack, and eventually things settle around here, and most of the war takes place from that point around the old 38th parallel, as the two sides, just tear one another apart trying to gain territory. One of the things that's fascinating about this war is, within a year, you've got that advance, and that advance all happening before New Year's. In a war that began in June, it's a real kind of a seesaw sort of a thing until it settles into a general war of attrition. Audrey, maybe we could just progress a little bit further back where we were. And let's go one more up. Forward, I'm sorry. That's kind of the iconic image of war, and if we think about what we've learned so far and what Bill will be telling us, a lone young Marine, though they had one another, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But you get some sense of the conditions. One more up. And then another. This is where the war ends, with North Korea being at the 38th parallel, South Korea being south of it. The line is actually a little bit north of that, but the two countries, of course, remain bitter rivals today. And maybe one more after that. Just before we turn this into conversation, a good book, if you're interested in reading that, this is by Hampton Sides. It's called On Desperate Ground, the Marines at the Reservoir, the Korean War's Greatest Battle. And Sides writes, the main reason Chosin had succeeded, General Oliver Smith said, was that there was a plan and that plan was carried out. It was also true, he had to admit, that his division was extraordinary. I have never commanded a finer body of officers and men, he said. But something else, something ineffable and transcendent had taken place at Chosin, Smith felt. Some said our successful breakout was a miracle, he would later reflect. Some attributed the result to the individual bravery and determination of the officers and men. But more than that was required. One of my regimental commanders summed it up in this fashion. He stated that he was not a religious man, but he felt that we had walked in the hand of God. That's as good a place as any for us to transition this and bring Bill more fully into our conversation. So Bill, let's start here. How did you wind up in Korea in 1950?
Well, going back a few years, about 10 of my best friends thought it'd be fun to join the Marines. Because they were going to summer camp.
Of course.
And you get to shoot those guns. And being 18, 19, when you were in uniform, you could have a beer. That was very important. So wanting to have a beer got me to Korea.
How was the beer?
It was pretty good.
Now, this was a Marine Reserve unit.
So so we were a reserve unit in Evansville, Indiana. It was about 320 of us. About a quarter of the reserve unit were World War II veterans. Our colonel was a decorated Marine from the Pacific, and most of our sergeants were all veterans, and the rest of us were just 19-year-old kids wanting to have fun, never thinking anything. And my dad warned me, he said, Bill, if anything happens, you're going to be the first up there. That they just ended the war. That ended all wars. There's not going to be any wars. So we're just going to have fun. But I should have listened to Dad.
Well, you were stateside. Well, you were in Indiana. Was it fun?
It was. We went, we had weekly meetings every Thursday night. And so we put on our uniform and drive 30 miles. And our group, from my little hometown group, 10 guys, so we had 3 or 4 cars. And we would all stop in a tavern on the way home because we had uniforms on. They didn't ask for ID. So we stopped in a different one every week that we went, and our excuse was we were being transferred up to Great Lakes. So we got away with it.
So you're leading a normal civilian life 6 days a week.
I was a printer, worked in a newspaper, and this Thursday nights played Marine.
Okay, so far we've got you someplace in Indiana once a week. But we also know that, Audrey, could you just return it to that single soldier? I think that might be a great image for us to keep here as we're talking. Thank you. But we know you wind up there.
Right.
Can you talk us through how you go from stopping and having a beer on your way home from one Marine Reserve thing to being at Chosin Reservoir?
Well, they activated our whole unit, and we went by train to San Diego, and then Marine base Camp Pendleton is right there. And so we were put into advanced combat training in physicalness because, you know, I sat at a desk all day or a line type machine, and but we were very active. We played semi-pro baseball, so we were in good shape. But you know, to go from that to in 30 days, they said, all right, you're combat ready. So there we went.
Do you think you were combat ready in 30 days?
Well, I was in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
But some of the guys had too much weight.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because when I was 6 foot tall and they weighed me in, I was 130 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
In the first 30 days of advanced training, I gained to 150 and everybody else was going the other way.
So someplace along the line, once you're done at Pendleton, I imagine it's onto some ship.
Yeah, we went on to a ship, I forget, the General Walker, and we were headed to Japan. We thought we were going there to replace the occupation troops because we weren't combat ready, at least mentally. And they didn't tell us where we're going, so this is interesting. You talk about faiths. We left on a Saturday and Sunday. There was a call over the loudspeaker for church service. So I went, and there may be a handful of guys there out of a ship of, I don't know, 3,000, I don't know, a lot of guys. So there's just a handful. So the next Sunday, then we knew we were going to Korea. You couldn't get in the place.
Oh.
Everybody got paid real quick. So that's what they say, there's no atheists in Foxhole County.
There were a few atheists on that ship
Yeah.
once it turned out to be Korea.
Right.
And so you wind up landing someplace on the Korean coast, and eventually, and you're part of the
Yeah.
1st Marine Division, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was in a group called Combat Service, and but before we were just replacements. So when we landed in Wonsan, and I'm lined up with my best friends. Al went to first do an infantry unit. My next buddy went to the infantry, and they said, "You're going to combat service." And they two of them looked at me and said, "Oh, you're in for trouble." It was the opposite. They both got wounded, and I was in the rear with a gear passing the ammunition up to them.
Of course, all Marines are riflemen.
All Marines are riflemen.
Even the commandant of the Corps, right, has to qualify on the rifle range.
Yeah. Cooks and everybody.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that people that study military science talk about a lot is the importance of unit cohesion, you know, in a group of soldiers. Can you tell us something about the people with whom you served, both the guys you went off with, but also others you encountered?
Well, you became very good friends with the guys, and then you realized that you're there to protect them, and then vice versa. So there quickly comes a bond, and a lot of lifelong friendships were made there.
And your alumni group, basically, your national alumni group is quite famous, right?
Yes.
You want to just tell us a little
Well,
bit
there's a
about
group-
that before we kind of get back into the narrative?
There's a group that we named ourselves the Chosin Few. Because we served in the Chosin Reservoir, so there's about 20,000 men that joined that organization. We still get magazines, still listen to the stories of what the guys went through. And there's annual reunions, so they're starting to realize, you know, well, I'm 95 and I'm one of the young ones.
Wow.
So nobody's buying green bananas.
You were what, 19 or 20 when you got to Korea?
Yeah, I was 20.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I was so looking forward to turning 21 where I could just walk into a bar. And I was in Korea, they didn't have bars.
So you're in Korea, and eventually you're headed north. And let's spend some time just talking about, you know, when we talk about the Chosin Reservoir campaign, you know, what sorts of things come to mind for you when you hear it mentioned, or when you yourself reflect on it about your own experience up there?
Well, I was fortunate, you know, they put me in combat service, and that was, we were unloading ships and getting the supplies to the troops. I just don't, trying to recall, in Wonsan, we were getting the supplies and putting them on trucks, and they were going up the lines that way. And we moved out and did another landing in Hungman, which is getting close to the border. And one funny instance, I went by truck at 30 below, in the back end of a truck. Couldn't feel my feet when I got to the airport. But that's the airport that they, or the airstrip that Smith built. And I was loading flying boxcars, which is a cargo plane. Mm-hmm. And I never flew in, so I asked the guy I was working with, how long does it take you to get the lines and back? And he said, 15 minutes. I said, wow. See if I can go with you. I've never flown. I'd like to go with you. And he said, I'll ask the pilot if your weight makes a difference. And he came back and he said, no, you can come. And I said, by the way, why do you have all the holes in the bottom of this airplane? He said, they shoot at you. I said, I'll see you when you get back. Not my first flight. Yeah.
What was the cold like?
Well, that was an issue, to stay warm. And you know, we were fortunate, we had tents to sleep in, and he actually, I don't know how the engineers did it, but there were 6-man pyramidal tents, and we had kerosene burning stoves. So
in canvas tents.
In a canvas tent, which didn't do much, but and they gave us cots.
Yeah.
So we're sleeping on a cot, but we found out quickly that the air gets under you on a cot. So we got rid of the cots and found some straw, put it on the ground. We slept on the ground.
Your infantry friends, you know, didn't in most cases have tents or cots, right? They were sleeping on foxholes, I imagine.
Yeah, they were. They did have warm-up tents in the back, and they got to somehow rotate to go back and warm up.
Yeah, yeah, they'd rotate that line once in a while, I guess. Yeah. So you went through this intense experience, and we're Doughnuts and Theology. So sooner or later, we've got to get the theology part in here, right, Audrey? Or else we'll have a lot of answering to do. This seems like an awfully intense, some would say traumatic experience for a relatively young person. I think a central question is here, how did this experience impact your faith?
Well, as I said before, there are no atheists in foxholes, so, but I was always, I didn't consider myself really religious, but my my parents made sure that I got to Sunday school every week. I got my little perfect attendant badge for the years of going to church. So I had a faith. So I don't know if that helped or not, but it was, I guess, a comfort to know that, and I know God saved me a couple of times.
Really?
Once I was loading the Amtrak's, so I'm standing on the edge. It's about that wide, and I'm standing on that, and I'm controlling the operation of the supplies being dropped down into this, and then I'd unhook it, they'd drag it out, and we hit a wave, and I was falling back, and God pushed the net over towards me so I could grab it and swing back in, so I didn't get knocked into the sea with all my gear on. So I know that was a God thing.
I mean, so were you actively in Korea conscious of God's presence? I mean, like, did
Well,
you
that was
pray
certainly
and things like that?
jogged my memory that he's still around.
Were there chaplains?
We did have a chaplain. So they had regular services, right? But one of the most impressive services was, nobody talked about their religion, or you're Catholic, or you're Jewish, or what you are. And so my two tent buddies came New Year's or Christmas Eve, and we were back in, I'm not sure where we were, and they said, we're going to midnight mass with the Koreans. So, we want to come? I said, sure. So it was very impressive. We went to this little Korean Catholic church. They had their mass in Korean, and we sat there and we knelt when they did. So that was an experience.
It must have been very powerful.
Yeah, it's a part of
Conducted in
it.
Korean, I imagine.
Yes, we didn't know what they were talking about, but
Yeah.
we knew what they were saying.
It would seem to me like being in a combat setting, and you were in a combat setting, and
I was always back behind the lines.
right. But the theater of battle was never that far off.
No, not too far.
Right. It would seem to me like for a lot of people who were in those experiences, it would tend to either encourage a stronger faith or shake one's faith.
Yeah, I think it made everybody stay stronger.
When you think back on it, as a religious person, do you have any kind of thoughts about the experience, as a?
No, I think at the time we were just, enduring whatever we had to, and there wasn't too much thought about that.
Right. So you come back and you get on with civilian life, and as we, learned during the introduction, boy, do you live civilian life. I mean, you have lived an incredibly rich and active life. You're 95 now. You're a citizen, and you're a veteran. What does Memorial Day mean to you?
Well, a little reflection of what we went through, but mostly it's being with family, what it's all about.
Some years ago, you loaned me a book that was about that Indiana Marine Reserve unit. It was a terrific book. I don't remember the title.
Unexpected Journey.
Unexpected Journey, and it's probably in libraries and whatnot.
Yeah, it's pushed on the back shelf.
Yeah. It's comparatively easy to find books these days. You find them someplace.
I go into Amazon and buy one.
Yeah.
They originally sold what, $35? Well, now you can get one for $3.50.
So there you go, $3.50, Amazon Unexpected Journey,
Right.
and you will read the name of William Cunningham in there. They never call you Bill, right?
No, Bill.
But it seemed to me like when I read it, you were William. Maybe, I don't know, doesn't matter very much. But when you will see Bill's name in there. And the story of this group of high school, post-high school kids who kind of get into this organization, a little bit of a lark,
Right, yeah, more or less.
and find themselves in a place where you weren't larking around all that much.
Right.
Yeah. And what a life-changing experience it's turned out to be. I would like to give you an opportunity to ask Bill some questions, if some questions have suggested themselves to you. And look at this, there's a troublemaker in every crowd. Do you know Phil?
I don't think we've had the pleasure.
Phil is one of our Doughnuts and Theology leaders. He's an elder right now, and he's retired pediatrician.
No, not internist.
Internist, sorry.
You can't do kids.
Yeah. Phil, it's all yours.
Bill, first of all, I want to just thank you for the service you did. I just wanted to mention, Pat and I were curious about this talk, and there's a program on Prime on American Experience. If you just search Chosin Reservoir, there's an American Experience. It's about 90 minutes long, and it was tremendous about that whole battle and experience. And so I just recommend that. Question I had, how do you feel your Army experience molded the rest of your life?
Say it again?
How do you feel your Army experience molded the rest of your life? Did it put you on a certain path? Did it change your frame of thinking? Do you feel it had a role in your successes later in life? Was it a burden, in the sense of the memories, the sad memories? How do you feel overall your Army experience intersected with the rest of your life?
And we're only going to change one word in that question, from Army to Marine.
Oh, I'm
Right,
sorry.
we gotta-
That's a
I had
big faux pas.
I had
Sorry
a
about
young
that.
Marine once.
Don't insult me.
I had a former student named Dominic Lavatola. I remember Dominic left after high school. He went straight into the Marines. I ran into him. He came back to visit school, and I don't know how the name Army came up. He said, you know, Mr. Schwartz, you know what Army stands for? Aren't ready to be Marines yet. So Phil's question is, how did this whole experience impact your life?
1,000 pardons on that. Sorry.
I think it's had a great impact. I was a sergeant. We finally got to be a sergeant, and my wife would tell me, "Stop being a sergeant." But maybe that's why I like to take control. And I ran our family. I have 2 boys and a daughter, and I was a strict disciplinarian. And Pat always thought I was too harsh, but I believed in discipline, and it all worked out. All 3 have educations. One's a doctor, a lawyer, and the other 2 do very well. So they turned out well. And I think, part of being disciplined. They knew you get in trouble at home, you're gonna get, in school, you're gonna get in more trouble when you get home.
Yeah.
So it does have an impact on you.
Thank you.
Marnie?
Yes, Bill, I was wondering if you had any contact with Korean people while you were there. It sounds like you were very
Not
busy.
really.
Yeah.
But when we got into the rear with the gear, more or less, we had a Korean boy that was about 10 or 12. We call him our house boy, and he came and swept out our tent and did errands, took our socks to his mother to get washed. But that's the only contact we had with
Yeah, I'm sure the area where that campaign went on, a lot of people would probably, civilians would probably evacuated, and any young man was probably in the North Korean army. They were probably all
Yeah, they were all
conscripted.
conscripted,
Yeah.
right. But when we left, they had a lot of ships when we pulled out of North Korea. 90,000 civilians came with us. They wanted to get out of the communist control.
They mostly
So-
relocated to the
so
south, I
they-
would imagine.
So the US provided ships to get them evacuated.
Brian and then Mary?
Yeah, I have a comment and a question that we're not gonna be able to address, but I feel in good conscience I need to raise it, and I say it with all respect. I've had ambivalence ever since I was a young man about Memorial Day. And so my point and my question is, how do you honor and respect those who participate in wars without sanctioning or endorsing war in general, if that's not what you believe, which I do not believe. If you look at history from the beginning, I believe most wars were not justified or necessary. So, how do you show respect and honor for those who participate in the fighting of a war without sanctioning war? And that's a big, big question we're not gonna obviously be able to touch, but I feel like it needs to be brought up.
But, you
On
know,
Memorial Day, while we honor people, we need to also look at the broader question of war. Is it worth it?
I don't,
How can you honor the participants, soldiers, fighters?
I think it's two different things. Two different things entirely.
It is.
I mean, the guys served, they had to, whether you volunteered or not, once you were in, you did what you were told.
Yeah, I imagine that among people that have experienced war up close and personal, probably there are no people that are more cautious and careful about plunging back in, because
Oh, yeah.
you've seen
Right.
things that people like I have not seen, and probably have understandings, definitely have understandings,
Right.
that people like me do not. Mary?
I'm still looking at that picture and listening to what you had said about the temperatures getting down to like 30 below. And I guess my question is, was the military prepared for those kinds of temperatures
No.
in the way they clothed you
No.
and housed you?
Definitely not.
I think
Definitely not.
today they would have clothing that was insulated and
Yeah,
kept you warm. But when you mentioned wearing rubber boots in that kind of weather, I'm thinking, oh my gosh.
well, I didn't get the rubber boots until after we got out of the Chosin Reservoir. And a lot of the other, most of the other guys didn't have them either.
So you
So
don't,
we were ill-equipped
oh, okay,
because we advanced so quickly. We blame MacArthur.
I'm sorry.
We blame MacArthur for that. We don't have any respect for that.
He was an army general.
Well,
But MacArthur was a controversial figure who tended to be a headline chaser,
And he had such a big ego. He told us to keep advancing. And our generals told him, we're exposed on our planes, and they actually held us back and more or less disobeyed his commands without really disobeying, so that we wouldn't be really hung out on a limb, which we pretty much were.
and MacArthur is later on in the war fired by Truman, because MacArthur is saying, we need to go right up to the Yalu. We probably need to bomb parts of Manchuria, and we may even need to use nuclear weapons. And Truman has told him, you gotta pipe down. He won't. He can't.
Right.
And that leads to his firing. The war ends with an armistice in 1953, but the two nations are still officially at war. And for, even though there's not active fighting taking place, so there have been quite a few incidents along the 38th parallel, and American personnel have been killed in some of those incidents. Some people called the 38th parallel, they used to call it the most dangerous place in the world, because these two countries are still officially at war. They're only in an armistice situation. Of course, Kim Jong-un is the controversial leader of North Korea now. South Korea just turned back a military coup over the summer, and it's a pretty solid democracy. We're 1 minute. 1 minute. Can we do 2 questions in 1 minute? Okay. Patty, you go first, and then John, you go next.
Bill, thank you so much for your service. I'm always very humbled by the courage that it takes to confront the fear that one does in the military, whether you're on the front line, whether you're on the 38th parallel, or wherever you are. It involves a tremendous amount of courage, and I thank you for that. What was there a fear going through you, and if there was, how did you handle the fear?
I was never in a situation where I was really, really afraid. My two best friends were, too bad they weren't here to answer those questions. But, you just depend on the guy next to you, and
It's a unit cohesion piece, right?
No man left behind. Right?
no, oh, sure.
John, I think you're the last question. As a fellow veteran.
Right, well, somewhat an answer to Patty's question. It's fight or flight, and that's the reaction. But to maybe answer some of what Brian asked, Eisenhower was one of our greater generals who rebuilt the Marshall Plan, rebuilt Europe. Eisenhower built NATO. His idea was to have a military so strong and so good that you didn't need it. It was presidents like Kennedy and Johnson that came along and said, why have such a wonderful fighting force and not use it? And that's where we got in trouble.
Audrey is extending us an extra minute or so, so we're going to have to end this, but we can talk for a long time. Bill, on behalf of everybody in the room and everybody in our church, and on behalf of a grateful nation, we thank you so much for having served. We thank you so much for being with us here this morning. It's a delight to see you and Pat with us. And maybe we'll ask Audrey to end us with a prayer.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all you've done in your life. Just so you know, next week we have one more Doughnuts and Theology, but it's going to be after worship at 11:30 with Laura Choi, where she'll be talking about the LGBTQ community and how to be an affirming church. So I hope you'll join us next week for that. But let's pray now, friends. Gracious God, we're so grateful for this beautiful life of Bill. We're so grateful for all that he has done for our community, our country, our world, for the life that he has served, for the care and love that he continues to share with us as he shared his story this morning. God, may we carry this story in our hearts as we go out into the world, knowing that your love is with us now and always. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you all. Let's go.
So well done.